if you put a pitch clock in the game, it might be much better for fans and much better product to watch as an entertainment piece. But, it could hurt the performance of the pitcher or the batter, which is the bottom line, which is what the Major League Players Association concerns itself with.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we speak with Mark Leibovich about baseball and politics. We're about a third of the way through the first Major League Baseball season under a raft of new rules.
1-1 is high. 2 balls and a strike. So Manny did not get into the box in the requisite amount of time after Bogart's line to center, and he begins 0-1.
And as teams take stock of their performance after the key Memorial Day mile marker, the sport is doing much the same. Threatened by lagging attendance and ratings as games grew longer and often duller in recent years, the sport instituted a ban on shifts, a pitch clock, bigger bases, and limits on pickoff throws and mound visits. Early on, games are shorter, with much more action on the base paths. My guest, Mark Leibovich, considers the state of the game in a new story in The Atlantic called How Baseball Saved Itself, and joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ian. Good to be with you.
We last spoke about your NFL book several years ago. What got you thinking about baseball this time?
Well, what's interesting to me is, my normal day job is politics. I'm a political reporter and have been for a while, but I periodically dip into sports just because that's what I spend a lot of my time, or have spent a lot of my time over my life thinking about and following the various teams I follow and so forth. Baseball was interesting to me because, it was everything to me for my first 30 years or so. I followed the sport so closely. I'm a Red Sox fan, so I didn't miss a game. The Yankee rivalry was so central to me. And then all of a sudden, over the last couple of decades, baseball just lost me. And it was a combination of things. But, at the same time, I've become more of an NBA fan, an NFL fan. I started getting interested in soccer a little bit. Baseball is just, and I was not alone. It's a sport that has really lost its hold on American culture. It was, as you said, attendance was lagging, ratings were lagging, fewer and fewer people were thinking about it, young people, African Americans. It was just a lot of the key markets were just kind of evaporating. And one of the reasons, in fact, the main reason, is that there was just so much dead time. And in a world where all of our brains have sped up on phones and computers and just all these immediate gratification, things, baseball just slowed down and slowed down and slowed down. And it really needed some radical reform. So I decided to sort of do a deep dive over about 6-7 months into how baseball sort of figured out that they were in an emergency situation and had to do some drastic stuff. And it just so happened that this coincided with these new rule changes, which have been, I think, a smashing success. And the numbers and certainly a lot of the ratings and ticket sales and so forth would back that up.
A lot of times the baseball leadership has been reticent to make changes. How did those conversations happen this time under the current commissioner, Rob Manfred?
Yeah, baseball is a extremely change-averse sport. For a couple of reasons. It's America's game. It is a game without a clock. We must always, let these pampered baseball players take as much time as they need and so forth. And there have been a number of trends in the industry, partly around things like analytics, which has just made baseball much more of a thinking sport. And you need time to sort of visualize and process data. And, it's not much to watch. But also the Baseball Players Association the players union is an extremely powerful union that can basically veto anything that the powers that be in baseball want to do. And they are even more change averse because, if you put a pitch clock in the game, it might be much better for fans and much better product to watch as an entertainment piece. But, it could hurt the performance of the pitcher or the batter, which is the bottom line, which is what the Major League Players Association concerns itself with. So it's been hard to sort of get around that. Finally, that changed a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago or so when a new collective bargaining agreement came in, and actually, a number of hurdles were crossed where they could finally do something like this. But no, it took a while, and frankly, it became kind of a desperate situation because baseball was just losing so much, sort of share of the sort of sports pie to so many other sports and falling farther and farther behind.
In terms of football, they play once a week. The games are pretty long, 3.5 hours sometimes. NBA, if you're a fan of a certain team, they only play a couple of times a week. Baseball is every day. How much do you think that plays a role?
I mean, I think it plays a big role. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, football, there is a clock in football. I mean, a long football game is, going to be maybe about 3 hours and 20 minutes. If it goes into overtime, maybe, a little longer. But ultimately, football, one, is an extremely kind of compelling TV sport. It has such a stranglehold on TV ratings for a lot of reasons. But there's that. And also, like you said, they play once a week. So it is a spectacle. I mean, people will allow their 3-hour football window to bleed, the extra 15, 20 minutes or so, if it means sort of seeing the result. Baseball does play pretty much every day in the summer, right? So you have, once all these games start averaging 3 hours and 10 minutes, that all piles up. And again, a lot of it is not action. It's just like watching pitching changes or pickoff throws or pitchers, walking around the mound or batters sort of staring into space between pitches and stuff like that. And that's what's been regulated out of the game.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about the tension covered in your story between the imperative to win and the entertainment factor of baseball. Those two things are at odds, aren't they?
100%. Yeah. I talk to a lot of people around baseball who, are very thoughtful. They're concerned. People who work for teams, and they're concerned sort of abstractly about the health of the game. But ultimately, if you're the manager of the Seattle Mariners or the San Diego Padres or the general manager of the Chicago Cubs, your main concern, your only concern, is to win baseball games. It's to try to get one more run or deny the other team one more run or get one player. It's all about wins and losses. And one of the people who was a character in the story, Theo Epstein, who was the general manager and sort of baseball operations guru for the Red Sox and the Cubs, who broke sort of the curses of both of those franchises, has now been a consultant to the league, helping institute some of these changes. And Theo said, look, when you're in baseball operations, it's a zero-sum game. I just can't spend any time thinking about, the entertainment value of what we're doing. I'm paid according to wins and losses, and so are my players and their stats, and I want them all to perform, and they want to perform, and that's when everyone does well, and that's when our fans are happy. But ultimately, if you look at, what the commissioner, Rob Manfred, said to me is, that's not going to help the overall health of baseball, and what we're doing is trying to sort of put something in place, and maybe it's a little heavy-handed, but it really was sort of overdue.
Well, do you feel, and does baseball feel, as if these changes have worked so far?
They have 100% worked. I'm first of all, there's a lot of data that would back that up. Ratings, ticket sales, so forth. But also, using my own sort of experience and also the experience of a lot of my friends and people who, like me, have been kind of lagging in baseball and have sort of like drifted away from baseball. We're back. And I, for the first time ever, bought the Major League Baseball package, and it's like $140 a year, maybe a little less, so I can watch every Red Sox game. And the Red Sox are not terribly good. They're a little over 500. But I watch a couple games a week, and it's a pleasure because they don't last that long. I can generally be on to doing something else, like sleeping, for instance, by 9:30, 10 o'clock at the latest. I can sort of ease in and out, and it's been a real joy. The time of game across the board has been, about a half hour less, which is perfect. Been to a game. It's been great. So I think it's been a massive success, and I think a lot of people would say the same who have followed baseball.
Yeah, I'm not a good test case for this because I'm a committed baseball fan, and I would watch no matter what the rules were, I think. One thing your story doesn't spend a lot of time on is the extra inning ghost runner rule, putting a runner on second. What do you think of that change?
Yeah, I mean, that's I put that in a little different category because it was instituted a couple of years ago. Basically, the ghost runner being, in the extra inning, starting in the 10th inning, teams automatically get a runner on second base to begin the inning to try to encourage or push along scoring so that the games don't go 16, 17 innings, which no one really wants, let alone the manager with pitchers to worry about and so forth. So it got a lot of criticism just because it's it seemed weird, but I like it. I mean, I never liked games to go beyond 11 innings, you do want a game to end, especially realistically if you get a melting down 6-year-old sitting next to you in the bleachers of some stadium, and he's got to go to school tomorrow. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to end the game from a pure entertainment purpose. So yeah, I think it was a good thing. I like it. I mean, I think I can totally understand the criticism. It's kind of antithetical to much of like what baseball is supposed to be, but I thought it was a fine reform at the time, and I hope they keep it.
Part of your story deals with the way these changes were rolled out initially to the umpires who had to enforce the rules. We're obviously seeing an age of intense umpire scrutiny with better technology.
Yeah.
What do you think
Absolutely.
the future of human umps is in baseball?
That's a great question, Ian. I mean, I spent a lot of time with umpires. I mean, this was not part of the plan, but they invited me out to the boot camp that they did for all the umpires in Arizona. I guess it was in January, to try to really, indoctrinate them in the rules of the pitch clock and say, look, we need you to enforce this. This is how it's going to work. Blah 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 blah. And you're right. I mean, umpires have a really, really tough job. I mean, it's always been a tough job. I mean, their standard is perfection. I mean, you don't want to mess up, and there are massive screw ups in baseball that have followed certain umpires forever. In big high profile situations. But also now you mentioned cameras. I mean, everyone watching a game can see exactly where the pitch is and whether it's in the strike zone or not in the strike zone. And also that square they put above on TV to show viewers where the strike zone is actually not accurate. I mean, it's a disservice, but also instant replay. I mean, you will immediately know whether the umpire is right or wrong, and that's in some ways it's good because they can get the right call. But on the other hand, every time a replay comes about, an umpire is on the clock, and it's like, okay, either I'm going to be proven right or wrong for the whole world right now, and I have 10 bosses watching this in real time in New York at MLB headquarters. I mean, they are scrutinized, they are incredibly tightly managed, and it was a fascinating perspective. But one thing I sort of took away from those conversations is, like players, like general managers, and so forth, it is all about self-interest. I mean, they don't have the power to argue whether this rule should happen or not. They just want to know the rules and know how to enforce it.
We're speaking with Mark Leibovich. His new story in The Atlantic is called How Baseball Saved Itself. Mark, while I have you, you mentioned earlier, of course, that you're also a political reporter and a longtime one at that. As we're speaking, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is going to kick off a 2024 presidential campaign. You had a very interesting recent article and breakfast with the former New Jersey governor. What do you think of his chances in the presidential primary?
Not particularly good. He's not really showing up in any of these early polls. I mean, Christie's interesting because, there are a lot of candidates. I mean, it's basically Donald Trump and it's just Ron DeSantis and then everybody else. And Christie is lucky if he even breaks into the everybody else when you sort of look at early polls. But what's interesting about him is that he's an extremely compelling figure, certainly compared to some of the others, in that he knows Trump really well. He seems to be building his whole campaign around really, attacking Trump and sort of talking about, what a lot of, I think, Republicans think privately, which is that this guy is highly problematic. His presidency was at best a mixed bag, even for Republicans. And, I would welcome him just as someone who is going to be much more willing to throw punches than I think the other candidates are. And look, I mean, someone I've covered a lot over the years, going back to when he was governor of New Jersey and when he ran for president the first time. I just find him to be, I think he's a welcome figure. I don't think he's going to win, but, he's someone I'll pay closer attention to than I would, say, one of the other people who are not going to win, probably.
You wrote an entire book about people who might have put their misgivings aside to join the Trump administration or the orbit around it. Is there a window for a Republican in this field who can criticize the Trump years or the Trump style and still win key primaries?
I mean, I guess we're going to find out. I mean, you're right. I mean, I spent 2 years basically for this book. It's because I'm called "Thank You for Your Servitude." Go read it, everyone over it. It's basically though about how the Republican Party sort of kind of bowed down to Donald Trump, even though they all knew better and said much different things about him privately than they did publicly. There are people who, in various ways, are trying to do that. I mean, Ron DeSantis is probably the best example right now, and actually I'm about to head up to New Hampshire to go to a bunch of his events for a story I'm doing. He's a protege of Trump. He basically got elected Florida, by virtue of being the best Trump sycophant in the state of Florida and ostentatious. And then now he's turning around and he's trying to sort of be Trump, but without the drama and with more competence and whatever he's trying to do. I mean, I don't know if he's the ideal vehicle. But look, I mean, I guess we're going to find all this out. I mean, from where we sit now, there's about 10 candidates, and Trump's got about 40%. And when you have, a map like that, Trump looks like he's going to win. But who knows? I mean, we're dealing with a lot of variables here and things that we might not even know that we're going to be talking about a year from now. So, like everyone, we're just sort of waiting and seeing.
As of this conversation, do you think a Trump-Biden rematch is the most likely outcome?
I mean, it seems like it. I mean, you just never know what to count on. First of all, you're going with old men. So, I mean, health is a variable. Staying alive is a variable. People just other factors sort of entering in. Whether it's a prosecution, whether it's some other candidate catching fire, whether it's someone else joining the race. I mean, you just don't know. But yeah, I mean, I would say certainly that's what looks most likely right now. And like most people, it's not the most exciting prospect in the world, but this is not politics is never about ideal choices. It's almost about lesser of the less ideal choice.
Just lastly, I mean, you've covered a ton of elections and candidates. Is there a storyline or an angle in this one that sticks out to you especially?
Yeah, baseball. I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, it's hard to find. I haven't looked that hard. I mean, that's one of the blessings of sort of ducking out and again spending a number of months on baseball or other topics that aren't directly involved in this. But no, I mean the beauty of politics is it either comes to you or it presents itself, and and part of my job is sort of finding what the angles are and try to write about them in interesting ways. So, I mean, I guess that's a very unspecific and unsatisfying answer, but ultimately, we're all sort of trying to do a job, and certainly in the media, it's just to tell a story and hope that it's interesting and helps us think about things in a more thoughtful way.
Well, best of luck on the trail, Mark Leibovich, and thank you so much for taking all of the time to speak with us. His new story in The Atlantic is called How Baseball Saved Itself. Pleasure to have you back on, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ian. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
All right, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.